So now we're going to be able to talk about something that actually I was editing an episode today, and I zeroed in on a phrase that I had, and I want to sort of take 10 minutes to expound on it. I said I was not able to afford expensive and cheap. Now, Jim, share with me what that phrase means to you, and then I'll explain why I think it's a little bit more interesting than that.
Yeah. Well, to me, it just means I can either afford to buy expensive guitars or I can afford to buy a lot of cheap guitars. I can't afford to buy both. I can't afford to do both. I can either afford to buy a buttload of Fireflies or a couple of nicer guitars. And I make my decision based on that.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. That's pretty straightforward, cut and dry. So there is that part of what I said that obviously makes sense. And I think in the context that I used it, I was kind of hinting at that. But what I really thought was interesting is as I was listening to it, I was like, wait a minute, but there's other wisdom here. And I realized, if you think about it from this perspective, as a practical guitarist, i.e. someone who practices guitar, in other words, makes a little bit of money here and there doing it, it doesn't make sense to me to go into a gigging situation with a guitar that's not going to be able to perform or like I have any doubts about. And so what I mean by afford that is it doesn't necessarily mean you can have problems that you can't afford. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a cash relationship. But like in my situation, I can't afford expensive guitars because literally financial reasons, right? But I can't afford cheap guitars because that's going to hold me back. And it's not about money. It's just the, it's going to hold me back. It's going to keep me from being able to get gigs. And so like it affects me in a different way. That's kind of the way I was thinking about it. I thought it was really, really interesting to take a step back and kind of like examine that a little bit further. So you're talking about, of course, we've hammered this subject in the last couple episodes, so we're not going to spend a bunch of time on it. You can go back and listen to those episodes. But like so right now the big cheap guitar, right, is buying like Squier Bullets and like cheap Amazon guitars. Yeah. Firefly comes to mind, Donner, million other companies. And expensive guitars like Custom Shop and above, right? So I don't really see. So we've kind of talked about our delineation has changed over the period of time of the show because we used to say $750 where Pro started, all the way up to sky's limit, right? And now we're thinking more. It's like $1,000 is where pros start, all the way up to sky's limit. And it's not that you can't get a playable guitar down to $500, like a really good guitar you can gig with. But the reality is that the market focus on the $500 guitar is more on the low end side of the market, or on somebody who just needs like the basic accoutrements to get through, their church gig or something like that. It's not focused on players who like are going to ride the guitar hard and put it away wet, right? Which is where I like to count myself, although probably don't fit into that category as well as I'd like. So as far as like why you wouldn't want to gig a cheap guitar and like why you wouldn't want to have a cheap guitar, I think we can take a few minutes to talk about that. So like why I can't afford one. Obviously there's the monetary thing that if I was going to have, if I was going to pick my guitars, I'd pick a couple of middle of the road ones, and then maybe I couldn't afford the cheap ones because I already had the middle of the road ones. Obviously that's a thing, but like, so if I was going to go in this situation, I was going to think about it from the other perspective and talk about why cheap guitars are not a thing for me. First thing I would probably talk about is hardware. And the fact that like the hardware doesn't work as well. So we just got done talking about Custom Shop Strats and stuff. And how they have the original tooling. So they got the bridge angle right and all that kind of stuff. And when I think about like the other guitars, the cheap end of the market, what the problem is like they are made with pot metal. If you're not familiar with what pot metal is, it's like a slang term for metal that is basically just slag. It's the garbage that gets melted down and then cast into something and then chrome plated so that you don't know that it's garbage. And they do a really good job of making it look really good. But I'm willing to bet that your Bullet Strat has what I would call either a pot metal or a slag bridge. And your bridge blocks all the way up into the high end defender are slag. They're zinc, or they're not even cold rolled steel. They're zinc, and they're like slag. Oh, in the Squier line, they're probably slag for the most part. And like that kind of stuff is where I know people think that stuff doesn't matter, but once you realize, like, one of the first things that a lot of players do is replace their bridge when they buy a Fender Strat, even like the higher end ones. They go right to Callahan, right? Or Babbitt's or somebody and get a drop-in replacement bridge. Super V is another company. Super V is another company that does a replacement Strat bridge. It's very widely thought of. That makes you start to realize, like, or go to 510s now is the thing too. That's the thing that makes you realize, like, there's something wrong here. And why I can't afford to buy problem, right? Otherwise, pickups, that's a huge issue. Like, I've never played a guitar sub $200 where I thought the pickups were worth it, where I wouldn't have swapped them because they like genuinely are not great. The rare exception is some of the Squier guitars. I think the pickups are a lot more passable than people realize, which is hilarious because the wire is made out of slag. It is basically like form bar made from, I say form bar, but air quotes, made from melted down recycled materials. It's conductive. I mean, you could say that much about it. And even the pickups they're not even like the parent pickups in that they're bridge plate pickup. Like there's a there's a bar magnet underneath the pickup, and the pole pieces are just steel. Well,
they're
steel, magnetized slag, the steel.
Magnetized.
Yeah. So
some
right, and that's
some ferrous material. Let's just call it that.
Yeah, that's why I shy away from them mostly because of the hardware, right? But also like the front end's playability thing. That's no big deal, right? Like that's a problem you can solve with the right root here. But even like, so if you look at Squier, like the bullet bridges, or not the bullet bridges, but like a bullet neck, the finish on it's weird. And why are those guitars like the maple always looks white, like China white, whereas on like, and it's not. I'm sure it's a tint thing because maple is generally a pretty light colored wood. But why don't they tint those necks? I don't understand why
mine is not white.
Yeah, well, yours is vintage tint. I can tell by looking at it. So that's just little stuff, and of course, like even things like skimping on body weight. So my first guitar was a Samick, and the body was maybe 1.5 inches thick. I mean, it's like that thick.
Yeah.
My Strats, they're like that thick. They're at least twice as thick, which is why I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Why'd that happen? Because they were trying to be cheap.
Right. So I was in the dollar store the other day, and this comes to the guitars. So I'm sitting in the dollar store, and I'm at the checkout counter. And I'm the kind of guy that'll buy a candy bar on the way out the door. So I'm looking and I buy a Snickers. And then I'm like, I just paid $1. And the part of my brain goes, I paid $1 for that Snickers. That's a cheap Snickers. But then you look at the size of the Snickers and you realize that Snickers this big. The Snickers you get at Walmart is this big. So this one that was $1, and this one that was $1.86, and one was this thin, and one was this thick.
Yeah.
You get my point, right?
They play with the proportions.
Yeah. So then I started going, So I look at the bridge material on a cheaper guitar. And I go, I look at it, and then I look at a more expensive guitar, and I look at the cheaper guitar, and I'm like, they're going thinner. And then I feel it. And that's what I was talking about with those bridges. I probably shouldn't have said the type of bridge. Probably should have said what the bridge is made of and the feel of the bridge. And it probably speaks to what you're talking about. This bridge might not be the greatest.
Well, I understand people having that fear about the bent steel saddles that you brought up, which is, and I'm going to say this because this might be broadcast out of order, because the bent steel saddles, Jim mentioned that like the string may slide against them. It's not really an issue because of the break angle and where the string sits in the slot. But I understand why you would have that apprehension because of the design of it.
Yeah, I just feel like it just feels cheaper. That's me.
Yeah.
Because it's a metal that's scooped out, and I'm like, where's the rest? But it was dyed that way. It was die cast.
Yeah, those are. I think those are cast.
Remove the metal.
So traditionally, they call them bent steel, but I don't know if they're actually bent or die cast. They look die cast. They look cast.
They look die cast. So my point is, you could buy a dollar store toy. And I'm going to go to this. You could buy a dollar store toy that's a car and go vroom, 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 and it's fun. It's a car. And there's nothing wrong with it, right? But you're not going to put that dollar store toy car against a Mattel. Is it Mattel that makes Matchbox?
Yeah, right. Matchbox.
A Mattel Matchbox.
Hot Wheels.
Right. Because in 40 years, that dollar store toy is not going to look like that Matchbox did. And I guess it gets to this for me. What you were just talking about is so important. Do you know when the last time I broke a string was? Once in years, I just broke a string. And before that, it was 3 or 4 years ago that I broke a string. So to break strings for me is an odd thing, and that's because, and I play with some fierce strike, but it is because I feel it's because I'm using quality equipment and quality stuff. But this gets to this, and I'll let you take it back. The holding you back has just as much to do with, yes, I'm going to have to do maintenance on these, but how much maintenance? Yes, I do have to, wipe and clean it. Yep, you're right. Or those magnets on the guitar. Right. But where is that line? And everybody's line is different of how much time I'm willing to put into that part versus the playing part versus the ginging part versus the other parts. Go ahead. Now,
I should echo what you're saying, but like in terms of the cheap guitar, like that you upgrade. Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. If you do that, like, from my personal perspective, if I'm going to spend $1,000 on a guitar, I ain't changing anything in it. Like, pickups better be good, because they ain't coming out. Now, as we get more inflated in prices, maybe that line of delineation starts to change for you. But realistically, if you buy a $1,000 plus guitar, you don't need to change any of the electronics. They're probably fine, unless they break. And so I look at that thing as like, oh, I'm going to change the pickups in these guitar and this $200 guitar. I'm like, dude, like at that point, it's now a $500 guitar. Maybe you should just buy a $500 one. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the way I look at it. But
what kills me is most people will say, yeah, I'm going to change the pickups in this $200 guitar, and I'm changing them with these $35 pickups.
Well, so that's a millennial thing right now. Is like, I'm going to go to GFS and I'm going to buy cheapo GFS pickups to replace the cheapo GFS pickups that are pretty much in it already.
That are already in it. Yeah. What's the other company that sells that to Monoprice?
Dude, the fact that people buy used Epiphone pickups is still like, it's just, I can't imagine. I can't. And it's a thing. So yeah, just we'll leave it at that. So, if you've enjoyed the content so far, please like, subscribe, click the notification bell below if you want to, listen to our idiots, us the idiots every time something happens. It'll notify you, and you'll be real upset.
You'll go, damn it! I don't want to listen to that.
Like, seriously, YouTube,
those guys suck.